And starting broadcast. Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Mike Bryant. This is Page One Power webinar, and we are very happy to have a special presentation today. We're going to be talking about building links and the insights from analyzing 1 million posts. And if you would like to follow along and extend the conversation out to Twitter, we ask you to please use the hashtag P1P Like I said, my name is Mike Bryant. I'm the event manager here at Page One Power. We're based in Boise, Idaho, broadcasting live here this morning. And with us we have some in-house guests. Nicholas Chimonis.
Morning. Thanks for having me, Mike.
And Nicholas is the director of our research and development at Page One Power. And yes, I have confirmed he is wearing the same shirt today.
It's cold in Boise. It's a good flannel. I think it was taken this time last year.
And I'd like to introduce also one of our project managers that's joining us. We don't have a slide to introduce him, but Cody Cahill is joining us as well. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Excited to be here.
And from this point, I'm just going to turn it right over to our presenter, and that is Steve Rayson. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, thanks very much for having me today. And yeah, you need more than a flannel shirt here in London today. It's a little cool today, so yeah. So and our clocks went back last weekend, so I'm still struggling with all the time zones. But it's very dark. Come 4 o'clock in the evenings now. It's dark and it's cold. So yeah. So yeah, I'm in a nice warm jumper today. So nice sweater. But welcome everyone, and welcome everyone to the webinar. As Mike said, if you've got any questions or anything, just type them into the question box, and we'll aim to pick them up. Also, if you're on Twitter, do use the hashtag P1P and just share your insights. Sharing is caring and all of that. We really like to get everyone's thoughts, so it'd be great to share any insights or tips on Twitter. But as I say, do just ask any questions as we go. We'll try to pick them all up today. If we can't get through them all, we'll contact you back individually, but we will try to get through them all. And we're going to keep this webinar to an hour, but I'll talk probably for about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll run through questions. But as you'll see as we go through, we're going to make it interactive. I'm going to do some findings from our survey, and then Nick and Cody and the guys are going to ask some questions, and we'll have a discussion. So hopefully it'll be great. So just very quickly, I'm from BuzzSumo, just in case you don't know anything about BuzzSumo. We're really a tool to help content marketers really to improve performance through insights and data. As you'll see when you go through this, I'm really sort of passionate about data really and trying to understand what works. And with BuzzSumo, you can just type in any topic and see what's working and what's resonating. So there is a free version, just go and play if you've not used it. But what I'm talking about today is a piece of work we did over the summer. It came from a discussion we had with Cyrus and Rand at Moz saying, wouldn't it be great to just analyze a big chunk of data and see if there's a relationship between shares and links and what's happening. So I volunteered to do that piece of work, so that took me quite a lot of the summer. So basically what we did is we took 1 million posts, and I'll explain how we did that. We took one set at random, and then we took other structured sets of data. But we basically pulled data from BuzzSumo on how many shares each post had got. We also analyzed content length and content format using the BuzzSumo data, and we pulled all the link data for this piece of research from Moz, so all the link data came from the Moz's database. So we really looked at 1 million posts, and what I'm going to go through with you today, because there is a full report on this, but what we thought we'd do is really focus on the link building aspect and the implications of 6 of the key findings. So we're going to talk through 6 of those findings, and I'm going to present some of the findings, and then we're going to have a chat about each one and what the implications may be. So the 6 we're looking at is, one is about there's no correlation of shares and links, so I'll show you that. The fact that most content actually gets very few shares and even fewer links, and you might be surprised at some of the data. Our finding that research-backed content gets more links, that long-form content absolutely gets more shares and gets more links. And then we're also going to look at the impact of different content formats, so list posts, Y posts, videos, etc. And then 6, what we found in terms of why people share and link to content. So I'm going to go through our findings on each of those, and after I've run through that, we're going to have a little discussion about what the implications are and what actions you can take in terms of your link building specifically from the guys at Page One Power. So kicking things off, we all know that shares and links amplify content. So you're always keen to see, who's linking to content, who's sharing content. We know that there's an amplification, but we were interested to see if there was a correlation. So would posts that got lots of shares also get lots of links? I think we sort of expected that there would be because logically, if you like something enough to share it, you might link to it as well. So I'll go through what we found in terms of the data. When we looked at the correlations, as you probably know, range from -1 to 1. A correlation of 1, a very strong positive correlation, would look like this. So in essence, it would just look like a line from bottom left to top right. So as links increase, shares increase. If we had a correlation of 0, it would look a little bit more like this. It could be this or a vertical line, actually, so that we know correlation. And if there was a negative correlation, which we wouldn't expect, as links increase, we'd find shares decrease and vice versa. So that's a very quick sort of overview of the sort of correlations. What we actually found was quite surprising. We expected to see one of these sort of more positive correlations. We expected to see it go along these lines, but actually it was all over the place. So when we put in our sample, and there's a dot here for each of the posts, and we've brought up to 1 million posts here, so we've had over 1 million in total. You can see there's clearly no line from bottom left to top right. In fact, the correlation is very close to 0. You can see that's almost a sort of horizontal line when you start pulling away from the chart. And so when we look at the actual data, the correlations were really close to 0. So we did 3 different types. So shares and domain links, shares and sub-referring domain links, and shares and external links. Basically, they were all close to 0. 0.02 is effectively close to 0. So despite what we expected to find, we found absolutely the sort of opposite, really, that there simply is no correlation of shares and links. And we also looked at Twitter links, Twitter shares to links, LinkedIn shares to links. We looked at all of them, but they were all about 0. None of them vary greatly. And so our fundamental finding, which was quite a surprise, is there's just no correlation of shares and links. We did find some content that got both shares and links. So there was that sort of sweet spot in the middle there that overlap. There are some sites that got both shares and links, but they were very much the exception. And overall, basically, people share and link for different reasons, because if they shared and linked for the same reasons, we'd expect to see a positive correlation. So what this tells us is that people must share and link for different reasons, because we're not getting any positive correlation. So if you're looking at achieving high shares, you might achieve visibility, but you're not going to achieve links. And I think there was a bit of a myth around content marketing a while ago, which was if you just get loads and loads of shares, then over time that will lead to lots of links, and that's good for your SEO rankings, etc. That's not the case. So in fact, in our sample of data, if we look at the very bottom row here, so if we look at the very bottom row, we took posts with over 10,000 shares, and we found 69,000 posts that had over 10,000 shares. There's a lot. And they got a lot of shares. The median, which was the 50% line, so 50% of posts got at least 18,000 shares in this little sample here. So that's quite a lot. So I'd love to get 18,000 shares. I don't get anything like that on my post. So 50% of them got, if that's 69,000, got over 18,000 shares. But when we look at the median referring domain links, 50% of them got 2 referring domain links or less. There's simply no correlation between getting 18,000 shares and getting loads of links. So there are some content that does that, but overall, that's just not the case. And even the average there is only 7 referring domain links, and the averages, as we'll see, are skewed. So basically, achieving high shares will not drive you links in its own right. I mean, the evidence, I think, is quite clear there. That's not to say, though, that shares are not important. This is a chart from Shareaholic, and they track, I think, about 350,000 sites and where traffic comes from. And actually, this is a year old now, this chart. They've actually now found that social goes above search. So more people visit sites from social than from search. So social is driving a lot of traffic. So shares are still valuable for content discovery, but they're clearly not going to drive you links. So that was the first key finding, I think, from our study, which is there just is no correlation shares and links, and I think for some people that was a surprise. So happy to throw that open and for discussion really. So Cody and Nick, if you've got any thoughts around that.
Well, Steve, I just have to say the research that you put together broke the collective hearts of the content marketing industry as a whole over the past 3 years or so. And I love it because it affirms our experiences of what we've experienced working with projects. I mean, Cody's the project manager at Page Empower. He can speak to this even more so. But it's very true that people do not link and share for the same reasons. And something can be shared a lot and not linked to. And it was, 2013 when Rand came out with a Whiteboard Friday called The Death of Link Building and the Rebirth of Link Earning. And it's a righteous idea. Yes, it's wonderful when your links are earned, but oftentimes you still have to go out and build the links you deserve. And it was in a recent presentation, I think he did at Search Love in San Diego, where he was presenting this concept to the crowd saying, after this research that BuzzSumo put together, I had to challenge my previous misconceptions and accept that they were wrong. He presented this idea that if you make great content, you share it out, you get social visibility, it will then get links, which will get you rankings and more visibility, and thus more links, and it's this link flywheel. That's a wonderful idea. It may work for most of the larger sites out there, but for most businesses, it's not a realistic link acquisition model, and this research completely affirms it.
And moreover, I mean, this just shows that the kind of content that gets shared and the kind of content that get linked is different, and therefore, if you're in the content marketing game, you need to have a game plan for both, basically. I mean, as you noted, Steve, shares are incredibly important in driving visibility and getting clicks and stuff like that. But if part of your content plan is to earn links and to improve search engine performance, that you need to have a dedicated strategy for how you're going to create content that gets links, in addition to the content that's going to get shared. This just proves that they're not one and the same.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. They're absolutely not the same, and I think our evidence proves quite conclusively that with a few exception of sites, and there are some outlier sites, the overwhelming majority, there's no evidence that shares lead to links. They might still help your SEO ranking in the sense of if Google does take engagement into account, maybe there's something there, but I don't think that's proven. But what we can say is shares definitely don't lead to links.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, so I'll move on to the next one and go through that. I mean, the other thing we were expecting to see is what we would call a normal distribution of shares and links. So if you publish something on your blog, for example, we'd expect you to get a distribution like this, or I would expect to get a distribution like this. So I would get some that doesn't do very well, some that does sort of average quite well, and a lot that does really well. So my number of shares increases out to the right there, for example. So I'd expect sort of normal distribution of content. What we found was that isn't the case. What we found was this, and we found this consistently, whether we were looking at shares or whether we were looking at links. What we found was basically this shape, which is that most content actually gets very few shares or links, which is the right-hand axis here, so or the horizontal axis there. So you can see that in terms of number of articles, most of them are grouped there with less than 50 shares across all networks. And then we found this really long tail. So you can see here we only go out to 1,000. And the reason I show this is because when I show it as a proper chart, it just looks like one line down the left-hand column and one horizontal line at the bottom, because that right-hand line goes out to posts that got 200,000 shares and sometimes 50,000 links, for example. So that right-hand goes out a hugely long way. But the bulk of people actually get very little. So we're not seeing a normal distribution where some articles get less than 200 shares, a lot get 400 shares, and then it goes down. We're seeing that most content actually gets very few links and shares. And we looked at lots and lots of sites to test this. I'm just giving you two examples here. The one on the left is the distribution of links on BuzzFeed, and the right-hand side is the distribution of links on the New York Times. BuzzFeed actually takes lower to flatten off than the New York Times, which is interesting, but you can see the same shape in both. So we're only looking at 40 links here, and often articles will get more than 40 links, but we can see the bulk of it. The bulk of it really is less than 10 links in the case of BuzzFeed, and really less than a couple of links in the case of New York Times. So that pattern we found it consistently across all sites, and we found it across both links and shares. We didn't find any differentiation there. And this is the really depressing news, I suppose, if you're in content marketing, and it's that most content gets few shares and even fewer links. Now, I talked about how we structured the samples. The first thing we did was we took just under 100,000. We actually took 100,000, and then we had to delete some duplicates and various things. But so we took 99,900 posts, as you can see here, completely at random, and you can see there that the median shares was just 8. So 50% of those posts got 8 or less shares. But look at the median referring domain links. Actually, 50% of them had 0 domain links. In fact, over 60% of them had 0 domain links. And even when we look at the averages, we've got that average of 257, but that's skewed total shares because some are out there earning 200,000. So you're probably better looking at medians here. So most content gets very few shares and links, and I think often people look at averages and they're quite misleading because they over-exaggerate. So if you're producing content marketing, only 8 shares, that's quite poor really. We then took a sample of some of the most shared posts. So what we did here is we took some of the most shared posts on BuzzSumo. So put into context, these are the most shared posts that we were finding on BuzzSumo. And the median shares for this 757,000 here was still only 200 shares. So, and we're looking at the most shared posts here. Now, admittedly, it's a large sample of 750,000 or so. But even there, we're talking 200 shares. But look at median referring domain links. Even for the most shared content, we've only upped it to 1 referring domain link, and the average has got up a bit more. But it is a tough reality is that most content actually gets few shares and fewer links, and that could be for a whole range of reasons, and I'll come on to explore some of that. I mean, some people have talked about content shock, and there's just so much content out there now that people have got less time to read and to share and all those sorts of things. But what is really clear is, on average, content gets few shares and even fewer links, and links are much harder to earn than shares, as we can see here. And that's probably because we know shares are fairly frictionless. You can go to a site, you can click share. It doesn't take very much to do. Putting a link into your blog or something, that takes more time and more effort. So just this point about averages and medians, because I think it's an important point in the context of what we're discussing here. This is the average. So this is for shares across all networks. So this is our average for a particular sample. But this was our median, the red line. And you can see that 50% of all posts, because it's a median, are to the left of that line. So the difference between an average and a median can be quite a lot when you're looking at a skewed distribution of this. If it's a normal distribution, it wouldn't vary much. In fact, they could be close to the same. But here what we're seeing is a real skewed distribution. And so there's a big difference between averages and medians. I think we need to bear that in mind. In terms of why people didn't like the post I originally wrote about this, I mean, I think a lot of people are wasting their time producing content, and for a number of reasons. I mean, one obvious reason is it could just be that it's such poor quality content, nobody wants to share it, nobody wants to link to it. So that could be a reason. I don't think that is the case, although I think there is a lot of poor quality content out there. I think there are 3 things I see people not doing. It'd be interesting to get the guys' views on this. I think one is research. People rush into content without researching what's resonating with their audience, what questions are the audience asking, what's helpful to the audience, because you might produce a fantastic piece of content, but if it's not really relevant or helpful to them at this time, they're not going to share it or get stuck into it. So I think people don't do enough research. I also think people fail to amplify content. If you don't have an amplification strategy for your blog posts, I don't see how people are going to really get it around and share. Some people just assume it's good, people will find it, people will share it. That's just patently not the case. So you do need to think about amplification. What's your outreach strategy, whether it's for building and acquiring links, or whether it's for getting influencers to share your content, or building in the amplification by involving them in your content production. And the other thing I think is another reason is that people don't monitor stuff. They publish and forget, really. And trends happen, and trends happen quite quickly. And I think some of the content that gets a lot of shares happen very fast compared to links. And if there's a story this week, it's about the black and blue dress or whatever it happens to be, it gets masses of shares in a few days, and then people forget it and people move on. And so if you're not very fast, you just miss stuff. And I think a lot of people write about things, but they've really just missed the boat. So I think timing is quite important. So they're just some of my thoughts on why does content get so few shares and particularly so few links. So be really keen to get the guys' views on this.
Yeah, I think we agree wholeheartedly. like we really found that the lack of research is a huge barrier to getting links. Not knowing who your audience is going to be and having a plan for how you're going to, like you said, amplify that content once it's posted. I think this just shows something that Nick and I have talked a lot about, is that a lot of people are just kind of creating content for the sake of content, and they're not doing it with purpose. They're not doing it with a plan. And I mean, that's, like you said, they're wasting their time, don't you think, Nick?
Yeah, and that's actually the entire subject matter of another webinar that Cody and I have put together called the 4-stage link building cycle, and it's really actually those exact bullet points that you just outlined: assessing your assets, finding what your website has to offer, what is actually going to earn links, and that's the research part. We talk about using BuzzSumo a lot for that, going out and finding what's been socially successful, what's been link worthy, etc. Creating the content, the outreach, all of that is all a cyclical process, and it should all backfeed into one another, and that's that monitoring as well, as that if this outreach isn't working or if this content isn't working, then you need to pivot and you need to assess what's going on. I think a lot of people are just putting content on autopilot. They threw a blog up onto their e-commerce domain because they heard they need some content, and content will help you rank, and that's like what the filtered down level of the content marketing deluge of 2013 to now, as it filters down to people that are less up high level and really know how to execute it well. When it gets down to just people who are hearing the bare minimum basic advice, all they heard was make some content. It will help your SEO, and it's so much more complex than that.
Absolutely, and that amplification portion is really, from a link building standpoint. I mean, that's the outreach, and that's the crafting the right message and knowing who your audience is, and getting that content that was thoroughly researched and you knew what that audience was interested in, and then making sure that you have the right message to get that content in front of the right audience.
Yeah, and I think another thing on the research is you can use tools like BuzzSumo and other things to do the research, but one of the things you can do is just ask your own sales or support teams about what questions people are asking. I mean, often people are struggling with something, or they've got particular questions, and I think content needs to be helpful, but it has to be helpful in addressing questions people are asking. So you want to be the best answer to a question. But if you're answering a question none of your audience are asking, then there's no surprise it's not going to resonate really. And I just think people just don't do enough research up front about what questions are their audience asking, what content do they like to share, what are they clearly finding valuable because they're linking to it or they're sharing it. And I just despair sometimes. I think people just rush into content sometimes without thinking about the research they need to do to understand their audience and what's going to resonate with that audience.
Absolutely, and that speaks to something that we really harp on a lot, which is that the content that will get shares and will get links is top of the funnel content. And a lot of websites don't understand that. A lot of business owners think that their blog really should just be blog posts about their products only, and are surprised when they don't get any comments or shares or links. And so it is about going out and finding questions is a great angle to be the best answer. There's a lot of psychology behind why someone links and why someone shares, and it's different. And oftentimes utility is a huge part of why someone links, because the content has actual actionable value.
And I think it's one of the utility is important as well. Excuse me, lasting utility is important for links. I mean, we see, you mentioned, Steve, that like timely content, if something's really trending, and that gets a lot of shares, and occasionally some links, but really content that has lasting value, evergreen content as we call it, generally performs better in terms of acquiring links. It's not quite as ephemeral, so to speak, and people will want to have link to it, and people want to click on that link because it's lasting value.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, absolutely. Yeah, and I'll come on to some of those points about why people click and link through, but no, I would agree with those points, absolutely. So, yeah, I'd say we were so surprised just how few shares and links some of the content got. So, yeah, it's hard work. Content marketing isn't straightforward. People say just produce content, as you say, but actually it's quite hard work to research what works. I think there's another point which I think is relevant. I think Brian Dean came up with this backlink flow about sort of skyscraper skyscraper content and things. About basically when you go to a city, you might visit the tallest building or the second tallest building or the third tallest building, but very few people go and visit the fifth tallest building or the sixth tallest building. And it's a bit like that with content. If someone's written a comprehensive post on how to do X, if yours is not going to be the best, it just may get no shares. And it does seem to be that the top 2 or 3 posts are the posts that just completely win out. So it seems to be more of a winner-takes-all game. So when you're doing your research, I think you've got to think about, can I be the best piece of content, the best answer to this question? Because if I'm going to be the 6th, most successful piece of content or the 6th best, that's probably a waste of time. So where do I have a unique insights or research where I can produce the absolute best piece for a very niche piece of content? Because as I say, if you're not up in those top 3 or 4, I think you're then struggling as well. Okay.
Agreed. There's one other thing I'd like to note on this actually, which I think speaks to this, is that a lot of people out there bought into the idea of link earning 100%. They went all in on the idea that they just have to make great content and they will come. The links will come, the shares will come. I think the outreach and being deliberate about going out and actually informing people that your content exists is super important, and that's a huge part. You hit on it, that people they're not actually going out and promoting what they've made. And so link earning isn't just about letting links roll in, it's about making content that is link worthy, content that deserves links, then outreaching so that you can get links.
Yeah, and we'll come on to that.
That's link earning.
Yeah, yeah, we're going to come on to some of those points about the type of content we'll do now, because there were some sites that had a positive correlation of shares and links, and these sites tended to have both high shares and high links. So there were some in that sort of overlap area, but we're now talking about outliers. So just be clear, we're talking about outlier sites, but there were some, and we were very keen to have a look at these just to see what we could learn from them. And when we did a first sample, that first random sample, we found some sites with really high correlations. You remember +1 is a perfect correlation. And these samples were low because it was from our first sample there, and then we took further samples. But you can see for the New York Review of Books or Pew Research or the Breast Cancer site, really high correlations. So it sort of intrigued us as why were these getting such high correlations of shares and links? And the more we researched it, and then we took further samples from those sites, it seems to be, and so this is just based on our sample, it's a reasonable size sample of 1 million posts, but what appears to be the case is that if you're a research site where you write about, you provide research-backed content, if you provide sort of high-quality journalism, now it's a bit subjective, what's high quality, but also we found opinionated journalism, something which was controversial, that type of content appears to have a high correlation of shares and links. And it appears to achieve that high correlation because it actually achieves a higher number of links. It achieves higher shares, but it also achieves higher links, and that brings up the correlation with it. So we were intrigued to try and understand this a bit more. So we did do quite a lot of work. We did about a month's worth of work just trying to look at these sites to understand it. And so we did more work. So, for example, we went back to Pew Research, as you can see here, and we just pulled out all their articles for the last year. So I think they are virtually all their articles for the last year, or however long period it was. And you can see that the average shares weren't fantastic. So if you look at Pew Research there, 751, that's good average shares, but there are sites that have a lot more than that. But actually, 25 average referring domain links is huge. So some posts get a lot of referring domain links, but actually to have an average across your site of 25 is really high. And you can see the same is true of 538, which is another sort of research data-backed sort of site, which is very good. If you don't go to it, it's a really interesting site to go to about data. So we started to look at these sites, and it does appear to be the case, and I think it's the point that Cody made earlier, which is if it's sort of research-backed, it's authoritative, it's slightly more evergreen in terms of its research nature, that does appear to achieve higher referring domain links. And I want to touch on also this point about opinion content, because we took samples, we took almost 50,000 posts from New York Times and The Guardian, and you can see the averages at the top there. Then what we did is we tried to identify opinion pieces, which were primarily columnists, and what was interesting is we then subsetted that data, and you can see here for the New York Times, the average referring domain links actually went from 3 to 9 when we started looking at opinion-based content, and actually equally the number of shares tripled as well. So there's something about opinion-style content, and it may be by its nature it's controversial. It could also be that columnists tend to write about something that's in the news at the moment, something that's in vogue, a controversy at the moment. So what columnists tend to be quite good at is writing about something that's happening right now. So it's about Trump in the election or whatever it happens to be. So it could be there's a recency issue there, that they're writing about something topical. But what we found was that the columnist and opinion content actually got higher shares, but importantly got much higher referring domain links. And so we then looked at other sites that we thought, okay, what sort of opinion-forming, high-quality journalism, because that was where we were led towards. And we looked at sites like Atlantic and New Republic. Now you can agree, disagree with their politics, but it does the nature of the site. I'd say it's more opinion-forming journalism. It's quite long-form journalism. And again, if we look at the average referring domain links, you remember our sample, 6% had 0. These are very high average referring domain links. So it seems to be that something about this style of article and research, and often this journalism was research-backed, seems to get higher referring domain links. So it's a difficult one because there's a bit of subjectivity in this, but there's definitely some content that gets high shares and links, and we'll come on in a moment to particularly the sorts of content that gets a lot of links, but it does seem to be that research-backed content, authoritative journalism, gets both high shares and high links. So it'd be interesting for your guys' views on that.
Yeah, I think we found all of those things to be true in slightly different ways, and in some ways this can inform brands in their content strategy. I mean, sometimes brands, and perhaps for good reasons, but they're kind of afraid to take stands on certain issues. They don't want to stir the pot too much, and this kind of says, hey, if you really want to get particularly links, but a high number of links and shares, you got to stand out from the crowd. You can't be afraid to kind of take a stand and have an opinion, and stand by it.
Right. I think the other part of opinion-based content, as to why it does perform well is above average, is that it typically evokes some level of emotion.
Exactly.
There's an emotional response from your audience, and you can be deliberate about targeting an emotion. Some of our best pieces that have gotten the most links and the most shares have been very controversial. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's 100 comments of people debating with one another in comments, and that's exactly what you want to see. You want people to discuss and disagree and agree, and that is a money spot. If you can identify pain points or points of contention or even just opinionated disagreements within your target audience, write about that, be the authority on that, and that's huge. I think the research-based content, it's oftentimes because the long-form content has incredible depth and an evergreen quality to it, and so it's not something that's just like a really I don't know what's the word, timely or news-based content. Oftentimes gets shared a lot but not linked because it's right then, versus something that has everlasting value, which will continue to offer up information that is relevant and with regardless of the time. That's huge, and it frequently is the content link that drives links more so.
Yeah, and to go back quickly to the opinion-based thing, we've seen many times, Nick, how like just having a vibrant discussion, a debate in the comment section oftentimes drives the links itself. The post itself might not, but because there is such a debate and a back and forth going in the comment section, the links are driven specifically because of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I agree with that emotive response as well. I think content which is controversial, and even sometimes content that's controversial for the sake of it, but really questioning, say, an assumed viewpoint or something like that, it gets an emotional engagement, and I think that's good. I think there's a lot of bland content out there of 5 ways to do X because people know list posts work, as opposed to something which is more controversial, which evokes emotion. And I do wonder whether Donald Trump in his whole campaign there, he just says lots of controversial things. Now I'm not sure whether he agrees with all of them or not, but it keeps him in the news because it's controversial. And I think sometimes something which is controversial is good to do. It's difficult for brands sometimes, but there are levels of controversy. Does Twitter work or not work? Is Facebook marketing a waste of time? There are different levels of controversy but you still need to provoke it. And I think you're right also about research. I like to think it's that people are interested in new data and new things as opposed to just, again, that 5 ways to improve X. I think people quite like trends. They like new research to see what's working. So I think there are elements of that as well.
Right.
Okay. Right. Okay. So I'll move on to the next one. This is one that I've been banging on about for a long time, really, and it'd be great to get the audience and get your views on this as well, which is basically content length matters. So as we may say it doesn't, but content length really matters here. You can see the data. I mean, this is the data on 1 million posts. So you can see we analyze the text and we look at the number of words. And so I've only gone up to the 3 to 10,000. That's the bulk of it, really. But you can see that if you're less than 1,000 words, and then as you move up to 2,000, 3,000, your average shares increase. Also, your median shares increase up until 3,000. Interestingly, above 3,000, the median level of shares doesn't increase any more from that. But if you look at the difference on median total shares through to, I say that median shares down to sort of 1 to 2,000, 2 to 3,000 increases significantly. So, and it's a straight linear relationship. As the content length increases, on average, the shares increase. But interestingly, the same is true of referring domain links. Now, you've got to remember that our averages were really low for referring domain links. But you can see 1,000, they had a median of 1, and it basically doubled as we got content length went more, and then it went up 50% again as we increased the domain length. So there does seem to be a fairly strong linear relationship between content length and the number of shares and the number of links. So this is sort of quite interesting to me because there are some exceptions to this, and one of the best sites I think that's an exception is IFL Science. If any of you follow that site, and millions of people do on Facebook.
Oh yeah. That is a great domain.
They only produce short form content, really. It's virtually always short form, but what they do is it's just like one paragraph, and then they have just a picture that explains a scientific concept or a new species or a video that explains a concept. So they do something which is really clear about short form viral content. It's just like 1 or 2 paragraphs, but there's always a picture or there's always a video which just explains it. And that's a sort of short form viral content that works well. But again, it's an outlier. When we looked across 1 million posts, that sort of content's an outlier. But I think there are examples where you can do short-form viral content really well. And if you want to know how to do it, I think IFL Science is a great site to look at as an example because they get just a ton of shares of their content, and they get quite a few links as well. But it's just short-form content. But they're very much the exceptions. What we can see here is content length matters. And this slide here actually comes from Moz. It was something that Rand Fishkin recently, which is they'd also found that high rankings in Google came from sort of document length as well, and there was a slightly higher positive correlation, but not in all industries. So I think the thing to be cautious of is that our data here is on average across 1 million posts. We didn't segment that into industry types, and it perfectly is possible that obviously in some industries content length is more important than in other industries. And looking at this work that Moz did, looking at your sort of ranking in Google based on document length, it may well be that if you're in dining and nightlife, no one's really after a long-form post. I don't know. But in other areas, it may work better. So I think there's just a note of caution, I would say there. But we've seen survey after survey say that long-form content works best. So you would think that most content marketers would write long-form content. At least I would think that. However, in our 1 million posts, 85% of those posts were less than 1,000 words. So we have all the evidence, and I can go back surveys over the last 3 or 4 years showing that long-form content works well. Despite that, 85% of people produce short-form content. Now, either they think they're IFL Science and they can do really good short-form viral, which is clearly not the case, or maybe they're too lazy to write long-form content, maybe they're just not doing enough in-depth research to write long-form content. But I think this is an issue for content marketers here. If you think content marketing is just putting up another post, 5 ways to do something, that's great, I've done my piece of content marketing. People like well-researched long-form content that has something new to say, which is more evergreen in my view. So it's disappointing to see that in our sample, 85% of text content was less than 1,000 words. And when we use BuzzSumo and we analyze what content length works best for different sites, I can tell you on Moz, on HubSpot, etc., it's their long-form content that gets the most shares and links. So this was a bit disappointing, I think, to see content marketers throwing out so much content of less than 1,000 words. So it'd be good to get your guys' thoughts around that and long-form content.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you're right to express some caution here. I mean, I don't think that, marketers need to go out and make every post they do, 10,000 words. I mean, there's a couple factors here that we haven't really discussed, which is like, engagement and readability and time on page and those types of things. But I think the lesson here is that you need to be varying your content lengths. If you're going to have some short form content, but you also need to have some long form content. You need to have a variety of contents with different purposes. Content designed to get shares, content designed to get links, and have multiple angles to your content marketing strategy.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we do with our own blog, Linkerati. Once a week, every Tuesday, we have a Tutorial Tuesday. It's not really meant to drive links. It's more of a social sharing thing. It's branding. It's to build our trust as a brand and just to build resourceful information. But every couple months or so, every few months, we'll have a big content push. We have an incredible link building outreach guide that is very comprehensive. We have a penalty guide. We have a link prospecting guide. Those guides, these big content pieces, are all long form. They're much more in depth. And we spend more time doing them. Not every post has to be that,
yeah,
right.
But you can be very strategic about making, this post is going to be built for links. This post is going to be built for social shares. Being more deliberate. And if you look at the Content Marketing Institute survey, the 2015 survey of content marketers in B2B industries and B2C and nonprofit sectors, it's incredible. It's like 75% of them do not actually have a strategy behind their content marketing. Mm-hmm. Like there's 25% or so or less that respond, yes, we have a documented content marketing strategy. Like 3/4 of content marketers in the survey aren't strategic about their content. It's really just kind of spray and pray, blast in the dark.
Yeah, I would agree with you guys absolutely on this. I mean, I think it's a mix of content. You need a strategy because, as you say, some content works really well for awareness raising and getting shares, but it's not going to get links. And that can be nice short form pieces that get shared or tips, etc. It's not going to drive your SEO necessarily, but it's going to raise awareness and things. And I think people need to understand you need different types of content for different stages of your sales funnel anyway. So it's fine to have awareness raising pieces. It might be a little quiz or something like that. As people move through the buying cycle, they might want to be, they might want to be educated and have a white paper or something more in depth. They might want to see case studies if they're starting considering you and whether to buy you, for example. They might want to do webinars and other forms of content if they're trying to convert them. So you need different types of content, but you definitely need it for shares and links because I think you're right. I think what we started to do is say, right, okay, we know these long-form research pieces we do, they get a lot of shares, but they get a lot of links. So we're trying to strategically say, okay, every quarter we're going to do a more strategic piece of research because people like this sort of more long-form content, etc. So I think you're right. It's about having a strategy and getting a balance of content. I think that's a key message I would take away from it.
Well, and those long-form content pieces are pillars on your website to build out, and then those are the pieces worth outreaching for, worth going out and doing some link building, finding some people that would be interested in the long-form content you put together and emailing them about it or sharing it with them, what have you. That's what you don't do that for every blog post you make. You do it for the true linkable assets on your domain, and if you don't have them, then you should build them, and then you should outreach them.
And we should be careful to not imply that content that doesn't get shares or links is necessarily not valuable. I mean, that's not the case. But I think if our audience here is content marketers and they're creating content specifically to get shares or in this case links, then this research really informs that.
And then it allows you to rank for long tail queries simply with good on-page SEO for your short form posts because you already have link equity accrued on your domain, which spreads across your domain if you have good internal linking from your long-form content back out to the rest of your domain. And that's exactly the case with Linkerati too. We've earned a lot of links built a lot of links too with the long-form content we've made, outreaching it, letting people know. And then with the short-form blog posts, we can rank for long-tail queries and information-seeking queries, which those short-form posts seek to answer.
Yeah, so I think just in summary on that one, whilst long-form content performs well, we're not saying all content needs to be long-form, but you need some long-form content, as you say, pillars of your site really, and where you're going to put a lot of the outreach work around and build your links. So, okay, just move on, because we've got a couple more to go around through. We looked at all the different content formats really, and this was disappointing to us, but because I've got to a point I get frustrated created with list posts, but there's no question that list posts do perform well, particularly when it comes to shares, but interestingly, it performs reasonably well when it comes to links as well. So we broke up content into different types, so what posts, how to post, why post, list posts, infographics, videos, quizzes, etc. I'm just showing a few here. The full report has them all in. But consistently highest was lists. So we took almost 100,000 list posts here, and you can see the average shares for list posts was significantly higher than others. And people do seem to like to share list posts. I'm not entirely convinced. They click on them and actually look at them, go through them, and I think there's an issue about what's shared and what's viewed. But they do seem to perform well in terms of shares. But interestingly, I think what surprised us a bit more was that actually the average referring domain links for a list post was actually much higher than content overall. Now that may be because people doing list posts are doing more promotion, more outreach, so that it may be self-fulfilling, but list posts actually perform much better than average when it came to referring domain links. What was also interesting is when we start looking at content types is things like quizzes can get masses of shares. In fact, we saw some quizzes getting millions of shares, but they get so few links. And so they're again an example where it can be good awareness content, it's good fun, entertaining content, people share it, but often people never actually link to it. So we found very few examples of people sharing to quizzes. There were some, but on average, people like to share the quizzes, but they don't particularly link to them. And so that was a very good example of content that performed better in terms of shareability than in terms of linkability. Again, to try and sort of bring it back into the reality as well about taking averages, we looked at lots of specific domains. This just happens to be the New York Times. So we took a batch of recent content from the New York Times, we broke it down into the different types, and then we saw how well it performed. And again, you can see that list posts and videos in terms of shares work much better for the New York Times. So it's even the New York Times, which has more traditional headlines, etc., list posts performing better. But again, what was interesting on the right was actually performed reasonably well in terms of links. The other piece of content that performed consistently well in terms of links was why posts. So these were just simply posts that began with the word why. So why posts seem to get a higher number of links as well. So we need to probably do more research around that. But typically they got a much higher level of links than other posts like how to posts or what posts, for example. So again, list posts performed quite strong there. So again, a point for discussion. There's lots we can talk about there, but say we found some quizzes that literally had 1 million shares and not a single link, for example. So different content formats do seem to be more suited either to shareability or linkability, which supports our conclusions that people tend to share and link for different reasons. So it'd be good to have your guys' input on that.
Yeah, I think that kind of speaks to the difference of the barrier to entry between people that share and link. I mean, it's much easier to share something, and so those types of quiz posts and stuff, I mean, get a lot of shares. People spend, a minute with it or less than that and share it really quickly. Whereas content that's going to get links is something that people actually, consume a little deeper and then feel compelled to link.
Yeah, I think we can blame Facebook for the list post winning out on social sharing. Facebook addiction is to blame for that.
But why does it? But why do I mean, it is somewhat surprising that the list posts also perform so well from a link standpoint as well. That is one point here that doesn't necessarily kind of roll with what we've seen. But I'm sure there's some reason for that. But that one's particularly surprising to me.
Right. Yeah, I wasn't sure what to say about that because I guess we haven't dabbled that much in list posts, just blasting out and trying to get links, but I just haven't seen that so much, so that's interesting. The why post makes sense to me quite a bit though, because it's very clickbaity. One of my best posts was why you shouldn't be link building yet, plus a comprehensive preparation checklist, and that one did really well. It was on Inbound. It was Inbound Original. It got a lot of upvotes and comments, and it actually got about 10 referring domains linking to it.
And a why post is likely to be that opinionated type post that's going to stand out from the deluge, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's an emotional response, and yeah.
Yeah. No, I would agree with those points, and yeah. So the one that surprised us as well was why list posts did particularly well in terms of links as well, which appears to do. So just move on to the final point, then we can have a general discussion. This is fundamentally, I suppose, what's behind the research is why do people share and link? And our conclusions are that people must share and link for different reasons, otherwise we'd find a positive correlation between the two. And we actually found 230 content items in our million that had over 200,000 shares, but 0 links. And these tended to be things like entertaining quizzes and videos. So this guy here on the right is actually dancing to, I forget what it is now, Nintendo music or something. Loads of shares, but nobody's going to link. No one's going to link to it. So it just reinforces the point about certain types of content is more shareable. We then looked at the research around this, and I think our findings would confirm what the research says. So there are a couple of research reports we got this from. So suggestions that people share because it's valuable and entertaining content. Now, valuable is an interesting one because it could be helpful and utility, but really entertaining content to nourish relationships, for self-fulfillment, to really define who you are in the world, to get stories out about things you care about, particularly sort of more maybe political types of stories. There's another one that came from Marketo when they did a study saying people share because they want to pass on offers and discounts, tip people off, warn people about dangers. But again, entertainment, amusing, inspiring, amazing, these are all sort of entertaining elements, really. And I thought it was an interesting piece here, all about being part of your tribe. It's a bit like, you're the top, New York Knicks fans or whatever it happens to be, you want to share content which reaffirms you're part of that tribe. So people share for slightly different reasons as well. Whereas we then looked actually at about 20 different studies about why people link, and sometimes they only focused on one of these, but this was our sort of overall conclusions, which is people link if it's highly relevant and useful, if it's comprehensive and evergreen, and therefore it has that longer lifespan, if it's authoritative, there's a degree of what you mean by authoritative, and we did look at things like domain authority and things like that, if it's exceptional, and there is a degree of reciprocity, which if you share mine, I share, or link to mine, I link back, etc., which we sort of want to exclude for these purposes. But it does seem to be that people share and link for different reasons, and if you're after linkable content, you're really going to be focusing more on this style of content, which is heavily sort of research-backed to things, as opposed to if you just want shares, you're focusing on a very different style of content. And there's an example here for BuzzFeed. I mean, BuzzFeed says it gets the overwhelming majority of its traffic from social. That doesn't surprise me because when you look at the content, it's a sort of traffic that gets shared as opposed to people linking to it particularly. So it doesn't surprise me that it's driving a lot of its traffic through social. So people share and link for different reasons. It'd be good to get you guys' insights on this because very much for what you do.
Well, we really loved this part of the research study a lot because it affirmed what we've been touting for a long time in webinars and content, that the barrier to entry to share is very low. It's such a quick thing. Anyone can sign up for a social media account and click the share button. But to link, you have to run a property, you have to run a web property, you have to know how to build out content, build out links. And that percentage of denizens of the internet that are creators and linkers much, much smaller than the commenters and sharers. And so, it's an interesting, it's just an interesting phenomena to me because at one point the internet was only links. That was the only way to discover anything on the internet. Any web page, to get there, you had to have a link. And then with the advent of social sharing, that became so much more accessible to people. And the internet, the ability to share stuff on the internet with one another became very accessible with the advent of social networks. And it has changed. It's really interesting that it's changed the psychology of what type of content is still link-worthy, but what type of content is just, fast food content that you share because it's a quick, timely thing. And so it is really fascinating, but it's absolutely true.
And just to add a slightly shameless plug for link building in general, I mean, one of the reasons that people will link to something is because content has been researched and because you have outreach teams, that know what they're doing and you can find the right audience and get that content in front of the right people. And I mean, a lot of this study is how does this kind of happen naturally? But I mean, if you have a plan in place and you know what you're doing when you're creating the content and you've done your homework in advance and you have outreach specialists who know how to craft the right message to your audience, that is the way that you make sure that your content that that you've invested a lot in will get the links that it deserves.
And getting those links, that is a lot of work. You have to actually put in a lot of time and work to make those links happen. There's so much less friction for something to go viral, to be spreading around all the social networks, and people just keep clicking the button. But if something's getting linked to a lot, you don't necessarily see that. You know what I mean? Like maybe it's a popular post, but there's a lot of stuff out there. We're doing competitive backlink research and whatnot. Something's linked to a lot, and you'd never know it. It says like maybe it's ranking well
you
for
know
a
it
few
because
keywords.
it would be showing up in the SERPs. That's how you would know.
Yeah. We probably just need to just flip through to the final few slides, and because we haven't got much time for questions, but Mike, if you pick up the question. So I just posted this as a test case because I posted this research onto Moz. So I was saying hopefully it's research backed, it was long form, it met a lot of the criteria for getting shares and links really. And so how well did it do? And actually it was the most shared on Moz that month. It wasn't huge, it's now over 5,000, but about 4,500 shares, but it was the highest in that particular month. And as of last week, it had 80 referring domain links, which is really large even for Moz. So that research-backed content, which may be slightly controversial or was producing some sort of new insights, definitely seems to work. I can tell you because it took me about 2 months over the summer to do the research. It's not something you can do every week. But I think it comes back to the one that Nick made about pillars of content. You want some of those pillars of content and that sort of referring domain links to your site. So I'm happy to pick up any questions. I'm sure all three of us have to pick up questions. So Mike, I don't know if there are many coming through, and if you want to throw any out at us, that would be great.
Sure, so I'll go ahead and address one here. We have Tom that asks, isn't long-form content a surrogate for developing material that builds authority for your brand? Absolutely.
I think so. I think that if you're creating long-form content that's unique and and it's research-based, and that is also building authority for your brand. The fact that that you've taken the step to create this uniquely valuable content is both building authority for your brand and creating content that's going to earn you links. It's kind of one and the same.
Yeah, and that's something I meant to mention earlier. To quote the late Matt Cutts, he once suggested that for the best link building, best content, I think he was talking about Panda perhaps, but you can't fake being an expert.
Right.
You have to be an expert.
Right.
And so you can't, no one's out there faking long form content. You have to actually be an expert to write long-form content that performs well. And so that it does inherently instill more brand trust when you do produce authoritative, expert-written long-form content.
This might be a content or a question more for Steve, but on the topic of sharing videos, do you count YouTube as its own social network, or are videos that are embedded links or shares? And this is a question from Harry.
Yeah, no, thanks, Harry. We don't count its own social network, although clearly it does have its likes and things there. But we do count shares, links, etc., to the YouTube videos themselves. So, and actually, a lot of our video content, actually, the top content often came from YouTube in terms of it being shared, whether that was Twitter, Facebook. It'd be interesting, that may move now a bit with Facebook doing more of its own video, etc., and people posting more video direct to Facebook. We might see that change, but YouTube was quite dominant in terms of top videos. Also, there's a question there about social listening tools. Do they add to the noise? I don't think listening tools add to the noise as such. I think a lot of the social sharing tools can add to the noise because people share multiple times and schedule content. Interestingly, in research we've done recently, I say to the guys before we started today that we've seen for scheduling tools, actually often they get a lot less interaction than when people post natively in real time. And that may be, I think, because either people don't pay as much time and attention to the post, or because they're sharing stuff which the time has already passed. They schedule it, it comes up next week, most people have seen the post. So I don't think that listening tools contribute to the noise. I think listening tools can really help you understand what resonates with your audience. I think you have to understand your audience. I think it's a prerequisite. So I think listening tools, if you really see what's resonating with your audience, can help in that sense. I don't think they contribute to the noise so much. I think scheduling tools can contribute to the noise if people just schedule multiple times.
We got a question here from Jessica. She says, I work for legal marketing. Nobody wants to link to an attorney site. Is it useful to reach out to other sites to have to host content on your behalf than it is to host it ourselves? I guess a couple questions there. For one, a lot of lawyer sites fail to grasp the concept of having that uniquely valuable content, and so I think that there definitely is ways for lawyers to create that type of content, that will earn and attract links, but also that obtaining high quality links is about having quality content, but not just about having quality content. It's also about general publicity and getting your name out there and building relationships and that kind of thing, and basically leveraging your authority I think a lot of legal sites and lawyers in general could leverage that authority better by doing interviews with the press. And if I'm link building on behalf of a law firm, I'm gonna interview that lawyer, and I'm gonna find out I'm gonna find out what's going on in the news that's related to their realm of law right then and there, and I'm gonna interview them and try to get published on third-party sites, using the authority of that lawyer. So there are ways to do that, that's beyond just having great content.
Yeah, and actually we've just been doing a study with an organisation looking at marketing in the legal profession. So I think it was Jessica. I'll try and hook you up with them because they're actually doing a piece of research around that. Because I think there is a lot more that could be done. It was just said. Because we need to probably wrap up, but I'm going to pick up two questions together. What's your best tip to find and reach influencers, and what's your favourite outreach technique? In terms of influencers, my technique is really I like to find really well shared content. Then I like to see who shared it. So I like to then view sharers as one of my BuzzSumo tips, view sharers, and then I sort by their retweet rate. And I then try to reach out to the people who have a high retweet rate because I think that makes them amplifiers. So rather than just searching, I can search in BuzzSumo or other influencer tools to find influencers in a topic. I like to find content that's really relevant to what I'm doing, see who shared it before, and then I start to reach out to those people in terms of my sort of content sharers and amplifiers. But I'm sure the guys who've got loads of tips, their best tip on outreach.
Offer value.
Yeah.
Don't go around the internet begging for links with nothing to offer in return.
Yeah, come with something of value. Oftentimes the content itself is going to be value. The value proposition, but oftentimes you need to come with more than that. You're not just spamming the web with outreach pitches that are begging for links. You know who your audience is. You're finding some way that you can provide value to them, and oftentimes you're not necessarily just asking for the link right away. You're actually building a relationship.
Right. Yeah. So maybe leave some comments on that target site's blog and share out some of their stuff on your social channels. Sign up for their newsletter. Send them a conversational email. Open up some dialogue and actually build some semblance of a relationship.
Be genuine.
Yeah. Be genuine. Be authentic. A big part of it is that research phase and actually finding what your value proposition ought to be before you ever go out and create content or send any outreach emails, so you can increase your chances of succeeding a lot better.
Great, thanks, guys. I'm conscious we've gone past the top of the hour, so we probably should wrap things up now. I think Michael said that everyone's going to get a copy. Who gets sent a copy of the recording. I think the slides we put on SlideShare or the site as well, so you'll get a recording and the slides. And I'm sure I speak for all the guys when you can just contact us direct, and the slides are our Twitter handles, or I'm just steve@buzzsumo.com if you want to mail me. So I apologise for any questions we haven't picked up. I hope it's been useful and raised some sort of interesting points for you. But thanks again to everyone who's participated, and thanks guys for the opportunity.
Steve, thanks for presenting. We really appreciated it. It was a great presentation. Thanks for coming and doing this with us.
Yes, thank you, and thanks to all our listeners. This is great.
Great.
All right, Steve. Yeah, we will be signing off. Appreciate everyone being here today. There will be a link to our video recording that will go out via email within the next 24 hours. If you want to get a head start on that, we will have the video up later today on our YouTube channel for Page One Power. If you want to take a look at Steve's original research article, head over to buzzsumo.com and check that out. He also did a previous webinar on Moz that was excellent on this same research. But a lot of different locations where you can find some of this information. Any other comments that you'd like to share, be sure to use the hashtag P1PWebinar. We've got people responding on our content team on Twitter. And then any specific questions like Steve mentioned that we didn't get to, we will answer those via email directly. But thanks again, Steve. Have a good day across the pond and a good evening.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks again, guys. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in as well. Cheers.
Thanks, Steve. Take care.